Life, culture and current events from a biblical perspective. 2020 with Neil Johnson on Vision.
On a Monday, we do like to check in with the Australian Christian lobby and so far as the political agenda for the coming week goes. But given that we've just had a very significant weekend, the South Australian state election, a change of government in South Australia, let's check in on how things are looking and the way that the new Premier is being signed in today. Christopher Brohier is the South Australian State Director. Christopher, welcome back to 2020.
Thanks, Neil. It's good to be back.
Well, Christopher, the new Premier will be Peter Malinowski. The ALP has won a convincing victory in South Australia. Let me just take you into the personality, the way that the new Premier, the Labor leader, has been portrayed, Peter Malinowski, showing him to be quite a family man.
Yes, so there was an ad played again and again, right probably from January on TV, on social media, and it showed Peter Malinowski with his wife, Annabelle, and their 3 kids around the home, and it had this voiceover: I'm a husband, a father, a weekend gardener, and a pretty average footballer. And as I was thinking about that, though, you'd have to think that those ads and the voiceovers were very carefully thought through, and it played directly to the part of Australians. So the word husband is important. He could have chosen, I have a partner, as people often say, but if you think in quiet Australia, most people think, well, I'm a husband. And most wives think of their husbands as husbands, not partners, even though some people may use that in the political speak of the day. And then being a father is also really important, that most men resonate with that. And then, of course, doing the garden on the weekend and playing footy. So that, I thought that was it was a brilliantly crafted ad, but those words are really important because it tells us something about the person, and I think that is fair dinkum, that's who he is, but also it tells us something of a recognition of what people really flow with. And the other thing to throw in the mix is he is, as I understand, a practicing Catholic. He regularly attends church. So we've got now parity in New South Wales and Malinowski in South Australia.
Chris, these sorts of images, we'll all know if we're not naive, these things are crafted very, very carefully by those who are leading a campaign. Do you think there is an adjustment happening here on the Labor side of politics, portraying leaders in this way?
Well, what I know is that the Liberals abandoned their base. So the Australian is saying today, David Penn, who is a very respected local journalist, that you got to dance with those who brung you. And in the Liberal Party, aligning with really extreme left values such as abortion to birth, euthanasia, etc., and Malinowski critically voted against the amendment to restrict late-term abortion. He voted against decriminalisation of prostitution. The Premier voted for it. All those things add up in the minds of the base. And the news media was saying on Saturday night that Malinowski is a Premier from central casting. Exactly what makes good Labor premiers: centre-right, people who have Labor economic values but conservative social values. And so it could be. Certainly South Australia is the most conservative Labor Party in the whole country. That's pretty well accepted. And so it's a very important first step.
Let's talk about the Liberals for a few moments. Stephen Marshall bowed out graciously on Saturday night. But there is something here. The Australian Christian Lobby campaign and Christian lobby groups were warning well in advance that if you vote for that abortion to birth legislation, there will be consequences. We will remind the electorate. That's happened. And how do you see things now, given the change that's happened on the weekend, and especially around Stephen Marshall?
Well, what happened was the Premier who voted for abortion to birth lost. He might even lose his seat. And Malinowski, who voted against the amendment to restrict late-term abortion, under great pressure from his party, he received a lot of blowback from his party, has been elected Premier. That's a very significant thing. You can't underscore the importance of that. Number two, we campaigned in 3 marginal seats, simply telling people how their MPs voted. And in the 2 Liberal seats, Newland and Adelaide, the members lost their seats. In the Labor seat, the member increased his vote on the back of this massive swing. We never expected we'd make much impact in that 3rd Labor seat because historically most of the conservative Christian vote would have voted Liberal. And so in giving that information out, lots of people, it would appear, change their vote. And it's, I think across the board, it'll be very clear that for the first time, the conservative Christian, but particularly the evangelical vote, went from Liberal to Labor. That's probably the first time that's happened.
And for those who vote only ever along party lines and ignore a Christian foundation to a conscience that would vote one way or another, that'll be a challenging thing to hear. But as you say, and first time ever, there's been a standing army on side of Christians who were willing and able to roll up their sleeves and letterbox drop and door knock and get on the telephone in those marginal seats. And as you say, there's now an obvious correlation as to how those standing army door-knocking and letterboxing appeals have gone. That's a pretty significant thing, isn't it?
That's right. Now, we don't want to overstate the issue. We can affect a percentage of the population. Really, it's 1 or 2%. But that is important in marginal seats. And it's also important in the upper house that we had 3 first-time parties running, 3 right-of-centre first-time parties running. One Nation, the Family First, which was a resurrected party, an Australian Family Party. And putting together their votes, they probably got 6 or 7% of the vote in the upper house, which is rivaling the Greens, who got 8%, I think. And it looks like it's pretty clear. There's a lot of counting to do. It's pretty clear that One Nation will get in, and there's a chance it's between Family First, the Liberal Democrats, and One Labor, that Family First might get in. So that's really, really significant. And if everything breaks the right way, as we hope, the upper house could swing back to be a more conservative upper house, where it's been for the last few years a pretty left upper house, and that's really going to be important in progression of legislation in South Australia. So this is a long game, but I think we're on the right track.
And for those who might be doubtful as to the impact of the pro-life issue in this election, as you say, those new parties, they all had on their platform a pro-life stance, and that's significant in itself.
That's right. So for the first time that I can remember, as we talked on Friday, you have parties saying up front they were going to preference on the issue of abortion to birth, and they were pro-life. Now that is really, really important, that people are coming out and making that declaration up front, and they're getting votes because of it. So the traditional thinking among right-of-centre parties is to say, go softly on these issues, just pretend to be sort of centre-left, centre, and get in, and then you might be able to do something. This was a real change for that. This was being upfront, saying, this is what we are, this is what we believe in, that's what our campaign was, and this is what these parties did, and it looks like at least one, but perhaps two of them will get up. That's really significant, and it's a message, I think, right across Australia that we have to state what we are. There's no good not being what we are. And just reading the papers today, people are telling the coalition, be what you are. Don't try to be a soft, green, Labor, Liberal blancmange. If you've got conservative values, state it.
And the polling that you'd done in advance of the election, well in advance, finding out what South Australians were feeling, that polling shows the public did not want abortion to birth. And now ACL calling on the South Australian Parliament to move quickly to restrict late-term abortion. What are the prospects for that happening?
It's going to be a hard fight, but it was raised with us by sitting members who've been re-elected and by some of these minor parties that one of the things they're going to do once they get their seat in Parliament is to move an amendment to bring back what's called the Spears Amendment. That is amendment moved by Minister David Spears to restrict late-term abortion. And just getting that back on the agenda is important to keep the issue live and to keep pressing it. To keep pressing, not just as a doctrinal moral issue, but these are lives of babies. And I've just been reading Matthew 18. Jesus says, we are to care for the little ones. And Father of the fatherless and defender of widows is God in his holy habitation. I think it's Psalm 83. So we have to care because these are lives. These are lives. And we are caring for the vulnerable. The other thing I just want to say, while it comes to mind, Neil, is this, that given the smashing of the Liberal Party, it is a chance that Minister David Spears will become the leader of the Liberal Party. Now, he is straight out evangelical Christian. And so we'll have this situation in South Australia, if that happens, and I pray it would, that we'll have a practicing Catholic as Premier and an evangelical as leader of the opposition. Never happened before in Australian political history, as far as I can remember. But that's really significant.
You know, before the election on Friday, we were contemplating the fact that it would be a earth-shaking election, that some of the things we've been taking for granted on the political landscape were looking like they were about to change. That really has happened, hasn't it?
That's right. I mean, the swing was massive. So in one of the safest Liberal seats of Finniss, which is down in the country, Victor Harbour retirement area, the member might lose his seat. And he, interestingly, he's a member who wouldn't even talk to us, the Liberal member, because he didn't agree with our... He wouldn't even talk. Even though we had supporters in his electorate, he wouldn't even talk to us. So this is massive. And one of the independents, we did a forum with him in the country, and he succeeded, he won. And in the neighbouring seat, a seat called Frome, which is centred around Clare Valley, the wine area, startup independent, first time running, secured two-party preferred 40% of the vote, second to the Liberals. And she is solidly, absolutely upfront pro-life. So these are really important things that are happening. This is a first step, but we're going to keep working for the next 4 years. And who knows what will happen in 2026. So this is really important.
Well, Christopher, glad to have you at the helm in South Australia as the South Australian State Director. Before I let you go, just a quick thought or two. Is there a message for the federal election coming? Given that the ACL has been so active on the ground in South Australia, well, there is that standing army that's active in electorates all around Australia. Is there a message for those who are candidates and for those who are running for this next federal election?
I think there certainly is. The message is this: dance with those that brung you, or they'll go and dance with someone else. The coalition can't pretend to be a Green, Labour, Liberal blancmange. They've got to come out and, on this specific issue, they've got to come out and say that if they win, they will pass the religious discrimination bill and they will not amend the Sex Discrimination Act to take away protection for Christian and faith-based schools.
So
that is,
religious discrimination is likely to be the issue coming up to the federal election that could be treated the same way this pro-life issue has been treated in South Australia.
That's it. That's the pro-life issue for the federal election. And we know that 4 or 5 Liberals voted to really end Christian schooling by amending the Sex Discrimination Act. The government, the Prime Minister, has got to come out and say, we're going to pass this bill and we're not going to amend the Sex Discrimination Act. They've got this, that's the watershed line in my view for this federal election.
And no doubt the standing army that has been so successful in South Australia and has been growing dynamically over the last year or two since its inception. No doubt there's room for a few more people to take part in that and ready to roll up their sleeves and to put Christian values front and centre in those electorates where there are marginal seats. And so the encouragement is to connect with the Australian Christian Lobby. Christopher Brohier is the Australian Christian Lobby South Australian State Director. You can connect with the ACL at acl.org.au. That's the website for the Australian Christian Lobby, acl.org.au. Christopher, thanks so much for sharing your thoughts. And with everything's happened on the weekend, I think you deserve a rest. Thanks so much for being with us on 2020.
Thanks, Neil.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.